To close out the year, I'm rewinding and bringing back the most popular and most listened to episodes of 2024. I'll be back with new episodes on Monday, January 6th. But in the meantime, here is today's Best of Rewind episode. This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm sharing with you some of the top regrets from retirees from surveys and research, as well as from my own experience over the last 17 years working with clients. Today, I'm talking about retirees who failed to plan. Now, these are all things that most people aren't going to express specific regrets about, like, oh, I wish I would have converted to a Roth, or I wish I didn't take Social Security so early. Now, sometimes they do, but often what they regret is not the action or the lack of action that they could have or should have taken, but they don't like the result of these actions, and they regret that because it often ends up being a failure to plan, often ends up with three different scenarios: either higher taxes than they would have otherwise had, lower income stream than they otherwise would have had, or lower returns from being too conservative, or on the flip side, a big dive in the market that wipes out 40% of their nest egg because they were too aggressively invested. So specifically, I want to talk about a few of these failing to plan actions that come to mind. One is having all of your assets in traditional 401k or traditional IRA accounts and not having anything in a Roth. I think of all the conventional financial planning advice out there, this is the one that gets ignored the most. I rarely see clients or prospective clients having a meaningful amount of money in a Roth compared to their IRA or traditional pre-tax retirement account assets. And you may like getting that tax deduction. In fact, you may love that tax deduction in your working years when you're saving in your traditional 401k. But the pitfalls of ignoring the Roth option, either in a 401k or a Roth IRA, is that you fast forward to retirement when you have to start taking required minimum distributions, and there's some problems with that. So if you were born in 1950, I just did the numbers on this. Let's say you're born in 1950, which means you're having to take a required minimum distribution this year. If your account balance is $1 million in your IRA or 401k, your required minimum distribution this year is a little over $39,000. That is money that you are mandated to withdraw from your IRA and pay taxes on. So it contributes to your income for the year, which is a pretty big shock, especially in those first couple of years of those required minimum distributions. And if you instead had diverted at least some of that $1 million into a Roth, then whatever you didn't have in that account is none of the money in the Roth is going to be subject to those mandatory withdrawals or mandatory taxes. I'm not saying that traditional IRAs or traditional 401k and taking advantage of those pre-tax benefits are always a bad thing. But what I find is that too often people don't put any money into Roth 401ks or Roth IRAs. And that hurts a lot when you are at your required minimum distribution age and you have to start taking out a pretty sizable chunk every year, especially if you have a good sized nest egg in those accounts. Another regret that I see when it comes to failing to plan is ratcheting down the stocks and risk, or actually I should say lack of ratcheting down the stocks and the risk as retirement approaches. This, I think, became clear in the last few days as I'm recording this. I'm recording this just a couple of days after the Dow dropped by over 1,000 points. Things are great until they're not. And so it's still too soon to tell if this is a sign of, the beginning of the end, is so to speak, when it comes to us going into a recession or it just being a little hiccup. But what ends up happening most often is that people will invest too aggressively and they'll ignore the warning signs that they should be more conservative. And then their portfolio drops by 10, 15, 20%. And then they realize, oh my gosh, I can't stomach this kind of a downturn so close to retirement. Then they sell, and they do so after a large decline in their investments. So having the right mix of stocks and bonds, ratcheting down that risk, making sure that level is appropriate at every stage of life, but especially as you get close to retirement, will help you avoid the panic selling that often ensues in a major downturn. Another one is taking Social Security at the wrong time. If you plan for this in advance, you can run the numbers. You can look at it from different angles of like, how long do I need to live in order to have this strategy make sense? What's my income going to be in 10, 15 years if I take Social Security now versus if I wait until my full retirement age? What's my Social Security spousal benefit going to look like for my spouse if I outlive them? And so all these things require some planning and thinking ahead. And a lot of people just decide, oh, I need money now. I want income now. I'm going to take Social Security now. And that's the extent of their planning. And that is a mistake oftentimes. All right. Now, the last thing is a kind of a continuation from yesterday. But I live in Oregon. I have a lot of clients who are snowbirds because it rains a lot here and it's gray and miserable and dreary from about November all the way until March. And many of you listening may be contemplating snowbird life in retirement. However, one of the regrets that I find that retirees have, and it causes them to unwind some of these decisions later, which can be painful and costly, is that they don't take into account other expenses or headaches associated with things like having two homes. So if you live in Oregon like I do, a lot of people live in Oregon in the summertime, in the spring, summer, early fall, and then they want to go down to Arizona or the desert in California, or even places like Texas, Florida, et cetera, in the winter. Problem with that, though, is that not only do you have the purchase cost of the house, but you also have all the maintenance and all the headaches. And if you look right now I really like Arizona. I like Scottsdale because I like to golf. I was looking at a townhouse in Scottsdale, very nice townhouse. You can rent this for $4,600 a month. Now, that may sound expensive to some of you. However, if you're contemplating buying a home down there, you would need to figure out what's the annual cost and can I rent a house instead, whether it's $4,600 a month. Or, you can rent a lot of places for $2,500, $1,500 a month, depending on how much space you need and what part of town you want to be in. But the point here is that most of us probably only want to go somewhere else for the worst of the worst. Like in Oregon, it's January and February every year. I want to get the heck out of here. It's rainy. The holidays are over. It's gray. It's dark all the time. And so if I was retired, I would 100% move and live somewhere for part of the year. But I don't see the appeal in buying a place because you have all the maintenance, you have all the costs, you have all the headaches associated with owning a place. Just if you're going to be a snowbird or contemplating that, look at the cost of renting for 2 or 3 months or however you want to go down there, be a snowbird for, compared to buying. And so this requires some planning, some number crunching, looking at the costs associated with it, but also fast forwarding. Are you going to want to go to the same place every single year? Maybe you want to go to Hawaii one year for a couple of months. Now, I doubt you'd be able to find a nice place for $4,600 a month in Hawaii, but I digress. The point is that you want to plan in advance for these major life-altering, costly decisions so you're not stuck with a piece of real estate that maybe you can't move or have a hard time moving 5 or 10 years down the road when you realize that it's a huge drain on your finances, which I find is often the case. Okay, so the key, I think, with avoiding these pitfalls of a lack of planning, it's one of two things. You're either going to need to do a lot of research and learning on your part and planning and thinking these decisions through to avoid these mistakes. And that's probably part of the reason why you're listening to this podcast. Or you're going to need to hire a competent and experienced advisor who can help you plan, more importantly, implement that plan that you've put together. Now, interestingly enough, this may sound a little self-serving, but in the same 2022 Retiree Reflection Survey from the Employee Benefit Research Institute, 9 out of 10, so 90%, the vast majority of people surveyed who used a financial advice professional and created a financial plan were satisfied with their professional and felt the value they received from using an advisor outweighed the cost. So if you think that you may not want to hire an advisor because it's not worth it, I would think again, because the lived experience of most people is that it far outweighed the cost and helped them avoid this problem of failing to plan. I'll get off my soapbox now, my self-serving soapbox. Hire an advisor. You're going to be better off. You're not going to regret it. That's at least what I've found in my own experience working with clients. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Michike, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.